现在订阅同盟会英语，不论找工作、升学或英检，表现更棒。快上 studioclassroom.com， 现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Things are heating up today on Advanced. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to Advanced Radio. I am your host, David. Today is October 28th, 2021, and we are on day one of our newsworthy clips. I'm happy to be joined in the studio by two fantastic people who are very knowledgeable on some of these subjects, or at least can give us some great insights into how to talk about them. Let me have them introduce themselves now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda. And it's great to be here, as always.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca, and this is a fun article. I learned a lot myself.
Wonderful. Now, we're really happy to have these two folks in here. Linda, I know, has, as I've always mentioned when we have her in for these kinds of subjects, Linda has studied a lot of different sciences. She also has a great interest in environmental sciences. She even worked with some organizations to do some environmental work in her history. So she's a great person to have here for this subject, which we're talking about, something that is regarding kind of environmental change and some of the effects of human development upon the environment. And Rebecca is here. Wonderful to have her here as always. She is very curious. She has a lot of great insights about things, loves learning new things, so it'll be great to get her insights on this as well. Now, we're talking about glaciers, climate change, right? And I did a little bit of research on this myself after reading this article, and it really kind of blew my mind. But how about you guys? What do you know? I mean, have you heard about theories of, melting glaciers and sea level rise before climate change? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we've all definitely heard about that. And I just can't imagine the impact that it will have. I know it will be big, and I've heard that certain low-lying islands or low-lying lands will be submerged because of these rising sea levels. For example, the Maldives, they are supposed to be, like, as the ocean levels rise, we might not have them anymore. So I'm hoping to get there before that happens, but I don't know if it will. Yeah.
Oh boy. And how about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, same as Linda. I think in the news, especially when they have major climate conferences, like sometimes the G20 or the UN, they hold huge climate conferences. And when they have these climate conferences, there's just a lot of news that year on climate change and all the different factors that impact climate change. And, of course, like we live on an island too, so we're pretty sympathetic to other islands, especially here in Asia Pacific, that will be impacted by climate change. And a lot of them are. Like, there are some small islands that they forecast will just disappear into the sea because of rising sea levels. And I think back when we were in school, like we heard about in the future, there's going to be a day when most cities in the world are all coastal. They're all on the coast, like whether it's in North America or South America, Asia, like most big cities are coastal. And some of these cities are in danger of actually facing rising sea levels as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that New York is dealing with problems with rising sea level. I know that Bangladesh, I think, is sinking. There's so many different things. Even some places inland, even due to the effects of our changing world. Cities like Louisiana are actually slowly sinking below sea level. And, of course, Venice, we all know, was already sinking. And that's also a problem as well. Have you guys ever seen a movie that came out in the 1990s called Waterworld?
I heard about it, but I never saw it. It's like Kevin Costner.
Yeah, it is
project.
Kevin. It's during a time in actor Kevin Costner's career where people loved casting him in movies that were at least 3 hours long.
Oh my.
There were a couple this epic movies that came out. I don't necessarily recommend seeing Waterworld because it's not actually a great movie, but
The concepts that
the concept is very
address,
interesting.
okay.
And the reason why I bring it up is because the concept of Waterworld is, you guessed it, sea level rise caused most of the world basically to be submerged underwater. So there's all this interesting ideas about like how dirt becomes really valuable, like dirt is more valuable than gold. And there's one scene where Kevin Costner's character, who can breathe underwater because he's kind of a mermaid because of evolution.
Merman.
Yeah, like I told you, it wasn't a great movie, right? But he like goes diving in this one area where there's a city underneath, and you can see him swimming underwater past buildings and stuff. Yeah, and I bring that up just because that's not really a realistic depiction of what would happen necessarily, but it does show that climate change, sea level rise has been a part of our imagination and even the Hollywood imagination for a long time.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's, the 90s is not that long ago, but this has been a reality that we have been aware of for a while. But
Right.
the difference is that now we're reaching a point where it can no longer really be ignored or discussed. The effects are very clear.
Right. It's not as fantastical as before. Like
Yeah.
another movie that comes to mind is The Day After Tomorrow. Like back when it came out, it seemed so extreme, but now it doesn't. It's like, we're seeing some of this right now, like the extreme change in weather conditions. Like in the movie, they showed like the desert. It's snowing in the desert, and we've seen that like recently. So it's not that far fetched anymore.
Yeah. Really? There was snow in the desert?
Well, in place Arab like countries, like where it's desert, but they've seen snow.
Yes.
Yeah.
It snowed in Jerusalem, and it doesn't snow there.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That is insane. Well, that's just some little windows into the changing world that some of you probably already have read that stuff on the news if you have an interest in keeping up with these things. So why don't we hop into our article and talk about another facet of these changing patterns, you know what I mean? Just these glaciers, which have been around on the Earth for thousands of years, that are beginning to change rapidly. Let's check it out.
Glaciologists studying fast-moving glacier with hopes of improving sea level rise predictions. A team of University of Idaho scientists is studying a fast-moving glacier in Alaska in hopes of developing better predictions on how quickly global sea levels will rise. Tim Bartholomew, a University of Idaho glaciologist, spent several weeks on Turner Glacier in Alaska's southeastern tip. The glacier is unique because, unlike other glaciers, it surges every 5 to 8 years. A surging glacier is defined broadly as one that starts flowing at least 10 times faster than normal. But the how and why of that glacial movement is poorly understood, although recent research suggests that global climate change increases the likelihood of glacial surging. During Turner's surges, the mass of ice and rock will increase its speed from roughly 3 feet a day to 65 feet per day. All of that is important because glaciers falling into the ocean are a major contributor to sea level rise, and current climate change models don't reliably account for these movements.
All right, so we got some people at the University of Idaho. RK, what are they doing?
Well, they're studying a very fast-moving glacier in Alaska. And of course, glaciers, as we know, is just like this huge piece of ice.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
And usually they're found in really cold places like the North Pole or the South Pole, and places like that.
Linda, what else can you tell us about glaciers?
Well, glaciers, they have been melting in recent years because of the climate change, increase in temperature. And this, as we discussed in the beginning of the program, can have catastrophic effects on the whole world.
Yeah, just like water world. Now, a glaciologist is someone who specifically studies glaciers, basically. And that's what people are doing. Now, one of these people, named Tim Bartholomew, what a name, he spent several weeks on a particular glacier called Turner Glacier. It's in Alaska's southeastern tip. Fun fact, Alaska is bigger than Texas. I think 2 or more times bigger than Texas.
Wow.
Which is which is a U.S. state that a lot of people think of as really big. Well, Alaska's bigger. Huge amount of land. Anyway, this glacier is unique among glaciers because it surges every 5 to 8 years. Now, they define a surging glacier. Surge just means to increase suddenly or strongly, to move very quickly. They define a surging glacier. Rebecca, what do they say about it?
Well, a surging glacier is one that moves at least 10 times faster than normal. But what is normal? I think we'll get to that very soon. But the definition is it has to move 10 times faster than normal. So that's a surge. And I think surge is actually a great word. I mean, it's a word we've also used a lot during the pandemic. Like we talk about a surge in cases. Like, for example, the government will declare lockdown when there's a surge. And so this word we've used a lot this past year.
That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that, but that's a very good point. When I see surge, I also think of a brand of soda that was really popular when I was a teenager in the U.S. It's called Surge. It just had tons of sugar and caffeine.
So it would give you a surge of energy when you drank it.
Exactly. It would give you a surge of energy when you drank it, and then you would have a terrible crash about 2 or 3 hours later.
I think I vaguely remember that soda, but I'm not sure if I ever drank it.
Yeah, you weren't missing out on anything. Don't worry. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a really great way to talk about the word surge, Rebecca. Thank you. Now, the how and why of the glacial movement is poorly understood, which is interesting. There are so many mysteries about our world still. But apparently recent studies have found that a change in the climate has increased the likelihood of glacial surging. All right, so what do they say about Turner's surges, Linda?
Well, the mass of ice and rock increases its speed from roughly 3 feet a day to 65 feet per day. So I guess normal, which Rebecca mentioned, I guess it's probably around 3 feet. And then so when that increases to more than 10 times, or at least 10 times here, it's more than that, right? It's like 20 plus times, right? Then it's a surging glacier.
That's right. So here we have ourselves a surging glacier. And that's important because glaciers falling into the ocean are a major contributor to sea level rise. And apparently current climate change models don't reliably account for these movements. Now, when we talk about models, we're talking about predictions that scientists put together in order to see how our Earth is going to be affected by different things in the future. So there are different models that show the effects of greenhouse gases. There are different models to show the effects of sea level rise. And they're just basically predictions to try to figure out, how is this going to affect us in the long term? All right. So why don't we go into our second reading now, and we're going to learn a little bit more about glacial movement, how that works, and kind of what these glaciologists are doing in order to understand the surging movements of this glacier better. Let's hop into that now.
Glacial movement has something to do with water running underneath the glacier. Glaciers are full of holes, and water runs through these cavities. When the water pressure is high underneath a glacier, it starts to move. But how exactly does that water move through the glacier? And how does that movement impact the glacier's speed? Those are the questions Bartholomew hopes to answer. Bartholomew, some graduate students, and researchers from Boise State University headed onto the ice in August 2020. They placed roughly 30 instruments into the glacier and on rock outcroppings alongside the glacier. Those instruments will remain on and around the glacier until the glacial surge stops, providing researchers with before and after data. Why it matters. Predictions about how much flooding will happen in coastal cities are all coming from computer simulations predicting the future conditions of the world's ice sheets. Getting those models right, or as close to right as possible, is paramount.
All right, now before I get back into comparisons to water world, we should remember that glacial surging is not actually a new thing, Linda, right?
Right. And if we look at the sidebar, it gives us a little bit more information on surging glaciers. They've been documented for centuries, actually. In the late 1980s, a surging glacier, combined with heavy precipitation in Alaska, raised the depth of Russell Lake by about a foot a day. Wow, that's a big increase. And before that, Native people in Alaska told stories of glaciers suddenly charging down toward their villages, forcing them to move in a hurry. That would be extremely terrifying.
Oh my goodness.
If you see a giant block of ice and rock coming towards your village, like moving at this fast speed.
Yeah. Get out of here.
Like,
you know what I mean? Like,
it
no
seems
way.
so unreal.
Unreal. I guess imagine the sound. Surely there's an awful sound that rings down from the mountains. You know what I mean? It shakes the very earth with such fury.
It is true.
Yeah. And just as a word here, Linda used the phrase, in our sidebar, we see the word heavy precipitation. Precipitation, it just means basically like weather, like rain or snow or just things that fall from the sky tend to be like precipitation, water in that way is precipitation. So there was combined with heavy snowfall or heavy rain, combined with the surging glacier is what created that quick rise of the depth of Russell Lake. And now we're going to learn a little bit more about what causes glacial movement. Now, in our first reading, we found that they don't fully understand the how or why of glacial surging. But what we do know, we can check out here, glacial movement has something to do with water running underneath the glacier. Now, this is an interesting thing. Glaciers are full of holes, and water runs through those cavities. What is a cavity, Rebecca? Is it something... isn't that when you go to the dentist and you have to get your tooth fixed, right?
That's actually my first thought, too. But a cavity here is basically, it's like your teeth. It's a hole or empty space between two surfaces.
That's right. And because of the way that the physics of all this work, when the water is running underneath, the water runs through these cavities, and when the water pressure is high underneath a glacier, it starts to move. A good way to understand this is if you've ever seen, some of you probably have seen around town or different places, I know in Hualien there's one, where it's like this giant glass ball, right, on a fountain, and it's this big glass ball, and it's very heavy, but they run water through it, and they run water underneath it, right? And that water, which is passing underneath this smooth glass ball, even though it's very, very heavy, it causes that glass ball to spin, because of the way that the water actually kind of like lifts it up a little bit, just enough to keep it moving. So that's how just simple water pressure can cause something as big as a mountain, really, like a glacier, to actually move, because it's full of holes and it's got this water pressure running underneath it, so it actually kind of lifts it, right? It's pretty magic. But how exactly does that water move through the glacier, and how does that movement impact the glacier's speed? Do they know, Linda?
No, well, they're hoping to find out the answers to these questions.
Yeah.
And Bartholomew and some of his graduate students and researchers from Boise State University, they headed out to find these answers in August of 2020.
That's right. Now they went through a whole process. They placed roughly 30 instruments into the glacier and on rock outcroppings alongside the glacier. An outcropping is basically a large rock or group of rocks that sticks out of the ground. We're getting some details about how glaciologists do their work. Rebecca, do you want to be a glaciologist after reading this article?
Actually, I love jobs that you can spend a lot of time outdoors, but there's just one small problem. I don't really like extreme cold. And I think if you're a glaciologist, you have to always be in extreme cold, or a lot of the time when you're not in your lab, you'll be in extreme cold. So I think just because of the temperature, it's probably not a good career choice for me.
Yeah, I can pretty much guarantee you that your work as a glaciologist will never send you to the Caribbean.
No.
You know?
No, is there such a thing as beachologist or something? I mean,
yeah. I mean,
Well, there are scientists who
like I could work with sea turtles or something.
yeah, there you go.
that's true.
There you go. See,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay.
I had never thought of becoming a glaciologist, but I mean, it definitely sounds interesting. But like Rebecca, I do not like the cold, so that would be a big drawback. But it would give you the opportunity to maybe see polar bears or penguins, depending on which pole you're at.
That's
you
true.
know?
True that. There you
And
go.
you won't be out of a job because I think the threat from rising sea levels will be around for a long time.
Yes.
So
They're
I think
necessary.
these jobs are very high in demand now.
For sure.
To
for
do all the
sure.
research that's needed to be done.
Yeah. And there looks like there is a lot that goes into this work. We see them placing roughly 30 instruments. They're not talking about flutes, guitars, and cellos. They're talking about different scientific tools that are going to be measuring all kinds of different things. They're putting these instruments into the glacier and on rock outcroppings alongside the glacier. Those instruments will remain on and around the glacier until the surging stops, which will give them before and after data. Now, RK, why does this matter?
Well, why do we have to track before and after is if we don't track before and after, then you don't know what caused what. So
That's
I
true,
think
that's true.
like we would do in any lab experiment, like when we were in high school or maybe when we were kids, we did any experiment. There's going to be many different factors or variables we call in science. And probably why they have all these instruments is they have to maybe use different variables to see what is causing the changes. So they have to track everything.
That's
I
right.
mean, data is very important. And from this data, they will probably throw this data into their computer models, and then the computer models might help us make better predictions.
Yes, absolutely. And those predictions are important because we want to understand how much flooding might happen in coastal cities by using the data that we're getting from, for example, just this glacier and understanding its effects in its area. We can then make wider predictions about the world and what might happen to coastal cities. Isn't that right, Linda?
Right. So this information they're putting into the computer, and then they're creating simulations or models of what could happen. So this would allow them to predict the future conditions of the world's ice sheets, of the world's glaciers.
That's right. Yeah. So because of how kind of dire the situation appears to be, getting those models right or as close to right as possible is paramount. Paramount here just means that it's more important than anything else.
Right.
Right.
Not the movie studio.
Yeah, I was just about to say, there's also a very famous movie studio called Paramount Pictures. But no, here we're just talking about something that's incredibly important. So yeah, I think that this is really important work, like it's not necessarily like the sea levels are going to rise high enough to flood New York City within the next 5 years, right? Maybe we're talking.
We hope not.
Yeah, we hope not, right? But I mean, realistically, we're talking more about predictions that are putting things out like 100 years, But that's basically, if you're, say you're, I don't know, 30 years old right now and you have a child, right? That's like probably within at least your grandchildren or great-grandchildren's lifetime, right? So this is really, like 100 years, being able to predict things 100 years out is really important. And also what's important is being able to convince people to actually pay attention to those predictions, to believe that they're actual plausible outcomes, and to convince people to, change the way that they do things.
Yeah, that is the hardest part.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the earth and the environment, actually, it has an amazing ability to bounce back, like if given the opportunity. But if we keep doing the same thing that we're doing now that is harming the environment and the climate, then, it's not going to be able to recover.
That's
and we're
right.
getting to that point where there's a point of no return. So it is paramount that we do things that make a change.
That's right. Thank you guys so much for joining us for today's newsworthy clip. Be sure to come back tomorrow and the next day as we talk about some more hot news from around the world. Tomorrow we're talking about Generation Z and the millennial generation and their entertainment preferences. Be sure to come back tomorrow. Until then, I'm David.
I'm Linda.
Rebecca.
And we're saying, make sure you recycle.
Yes.
Yes, make sure you recycle.